It's 10:01 approaching 10:02, so I want to be respectful of your time. Good morning, everyone. I assume you can all hear me and see me, so someone let me know if that is not the case. I've got 2 raised hands here. Let me just check on that. I hope that means you can hear me. Craig or Joseph, if you have any issue, just chat me. That'll be a little easier. Okay. My name is Carrie Slade. I'm the Assistant Academic Director of Temple's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute. I'm also an Assistant Professor at Temple University, and I'm the one hosting these Innovation Leader Speaker Series. Hopefully you've been able to join us for some of our past events, and we will continue to have more events in the future, so please stay tuned for future events. And we also have recordings on YouTube if you'd like to look at some of our past events. So this program grew out of one of our graduate programs, our Innovation Management and Entrepreneurship Master's degree. We teach a lot of really interesting concepts and theories and practices in these courses, and we wanted to bring them to the larger community and not just keep them in the classroom. At Temple, we're very focused on bringing practical applications to the concepts that we teach, and we do that a lot in our classes. And we wanted to do the same thing for you in these free webinar series and in-person events if we do review in person. If you're interested in a potential career change or elevating your career, you may want to consider our Masters of Science in Innovation Management and Entrepreneurship, or potentially a graduate certificate, which is only 3 classes. So you could be done in as little as 1 semester if you want. If you would like more information, feel free to contact me. My email is at the bottom of the screen there. There's also a QR code, and this QR code is for more information on our program. For those of you who may be looking for a QR code for the suitable application to get credit for your MBA experiences, the way that will work is we'll email an attendance list of the webinar, and then they'll be able to check you off that you attended the webinar, so you'll get credit for that. Okay. I want to introduce our wonderful speakers to talk about what is going on in the entrepreneurial ecosystem now. Philadelphia has a traditionally very strong ecosystem, and we want to know what's happening. Is it dead? Is it shifting? You know, what can entrepreneurs expect, and what can people participating in the ecosystem expect? So first, Ellen Weber, the Executive Director of our Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute at Temple University at the Fox School of Business. Hopefully when things open up, you can come by Temple University to look at our brand new building. We have a brand new accelerator there, and Ellen has been integral in growing our programs and putting the IEI really on the map in Philadelphia. She's also the Executive Director of Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures, which is an investor forum that helps technology-based companies grow and scale and refine their businesses. And she's also the Executive Director of Robin Hood Ventures, an angel investor group. And if you're wondering how someone can be Executive Director of 3 things at the same time, that is a very good question. I know that Ellen works very hard, and that could be a whole nother webinar about how she was able to do that. So I'm really excited to hear Ellen's thoughts on that, on the ecosystem. Next is Glen Gaddy, who's the chair of Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures. Glen has been an angel investor for almost 2 decades now. He has a PhD in applied materials and let's see, it's materials science and engineering from Johns Hopkins University, as well as other degrees. So he's a scientist at heart. He's also worked in the real estate industry, and he knows how to take an idea, turn it into a product, and then bring it to market. If you know Glenn, he always tells it like it is. So I'm also really looking forward to his thoughts. And I'd love to welcome both of our speakers here today and thank them for taking the time to join us. Okay, with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Okay, great. Let me just get this up and running. And I will start with a disclaimer that as we talk about the entrepreneurial community, Glenn and I are coming from the perspective of people who are active in the funding community. There is a much broader entrepreneurial community as well. And there are actually some people on this call who can probably speak to the community outside of the funding community. So I did want to start with that disclaimer. So Glenn and I are going to go back and forth. We teach a class together, so any of you who've had a class with us before, kind of used to that drill. And we are excited to talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're going to start talking a little bit about the research on entrepreneurial ecosystems. Then we'll talk about how that plays out in Philadelphia. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that Temple has to offer. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. So we're looking forward to the Q&A as well. So let's start with, there's a group called the Startup Genome. And every other year, they produce a global startup ecosystem rating report. And they look at a number of criteria. So they're looking at performance of the ecosystem. They're looking at how much funding is in the ecosystem. They're looking at the market reach of the companies in the ecosystem. They're looking at how connected the organizations are to each other, both the entrepreneurs, the supporters of entrepreneurship, the government that surrounds it, et cetera. We'll talk a little bit more about the leaders and feeders, but connectivity is really key. They look at the talent in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's a really vital part of what makes or breaks an ecosystem. They look at the experience in the ecosystem itself and how much knowledge there is. So there's talent, but there's also knowledge. So if you look at these criteria, you know, who would you expect to appear in the top 10 listings? I think most people off the top of their heads would say Silicon Valley and New York. Their list is actually much broader than that. So let me show you what their data showed. And I know this is a little hard to see, but this is the report that they provide. So Silicon Valley has consistently been the top rated global startup ecosystem, followed by New York, London, Beijing, they're tied for fourth, Boston, Tel Aviv and Los Angeles, Shanghai, Paris, Berlin. That's the top 10. And you can see a lot of other national and international cities in this ecosystem ranking. You may notice that Philadelphia is not in the top 30, and many of us are doing what we can to change that. The other interesting thing about this ranking is this is the overall ecosystem ranking. If you look at particular industries, then the rankings change, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. You can also see that there's been some change in the rankings since 2017, with Amsterdam and Stockholm doing the most positive upwards movement. So a lot of activity in Europe. So they look at performance, funding, market reach, connectedness, talent, experience, and knowledge and growth. And we're going to talk a little bit about the things that communities can do to move things along. So let's talk a little bit about recommendations that the Startup Genome Group had for entrepreneurs to grow. So one of the things they talk about is to use the global startup ecosystem to distribute your organization really strategically, aligning with the strengths of each ecosystem. So they do recommend having your executive team headquartered, or at least spend a lot of time in a well-capitalized ecosystem like Silicon Valley or New York or some of the others that were on the list. But they strongly suggest to work in a smaller and cheaper startup ecosystem when your startup is pre-product market fit. And so we see that in Philadelphia. We see where a lot of companies start here, and then they might switch their headquarters, to get access to more capital. This is something that really needs to change over time. But at a minimum, you can keep your company here and then, move a sales office or have a second headquarters. So that's some of the recommendations that the Startup Genome makes. Set up a second office also focused on engineering in an ecosystem with really inexpensive and plentiful tech talent. So Austin, Tel Aviv, and Sydney, Australia are three of the areas that scored highest in the Startup Genome. And then set up a second sales office in New York City to get access to the US market and many big potential customers. So again, that's an international recommendation that they make. Then they have recommendations to investors. So spend more time looking for opportunities in the undervalued ecosystems. So a lot of investors just focus on Silicon Valley, focus on New York, And the recommendation from Startup Genome is if you want to be successful investors, you need to broaden your reach, and you need to look at the undervalued ecosystems. You can actually get better deals in systems where the valuations aren't, I would say, crazy, like they are in Silicon Valley or New York. And I'm sure Glenn will have some things to say about that. And spend less time looking for opportunities in New York, Toronto, Seattle, Boston, which have reached a financial equilibrium and are likely to have fewer underpriced, undiscovered gems of companies. When we talk to venture capitalists from outside the region, they always are like, wow, we had no idea there were such gems here. And that's something, the region really needs to pay some attention to. We need investors outside the region to understand who we are and what we are. There's an investor, Steve Case, who has an organization called Rise of the Rest, and he's really trying to encourage investment in some of these undervalued ecosystems, of which Philadelphia is considered one. And that, in a lot of ways, it's a plus and a minus. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the recommendations to policymakers, and I hope there's a few policymakers on the phone. These are things that the Philadelphia startup community has brought to their attention. And there's also some research that was done with the policymakers that I'll talk about as well, recommendations. So one thing is to find ways to stimulate the financial foundation of your ecosystem by offering matching grants. Tel Aviv, Singapore, Santiago have all done really well with that. And the important thing is that they be matching grants. There's a natural, so there's a very strong belief that rather than trying to become a venture capitalist as a policymaker, match what the venture capitalists are doing. So rely on them to do the due diligence and then match what they're doing. Create a policy that minimizes the friction of incoming flow of foreign capital and foreign talent. And this is one I hear over and over again in Philadelphia. And I know there's been some work done, but there's a whole lot more that can be done. Simplify the regulations for startups. Allow for the low legal cost of startup formation, startup bankruptcy, and liquidation on startup exit. One of the changes that was put in place, and if there's a policymaker, you can hold me accountable for this during the Q&A, but my understanding is that startups had to pay business taxes even when they were losing money, and it was making it impossible, and the taxes were impossible to understand, and that some of the innovators in Philadelphia city government did simplify some of the regulations, but there's so much more that can be done. And then the policymakers can help differentiate the startup ecosystem, working with the other parts of the ecosystem to really accentuate its strengths. So, and we'll talk about what the different strengths are in Philly and what some of the recommendations are there. Okay, so startup subsector life cycle. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn.
Thank you. I had to mute myself as I was sneezing. Welcome to allergy season for many of us. Sorry about that. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that investors come in two flavors. They come as those that are very, very focused on the industry that they have deep knowledge of, or they are focused on some other metric. For example, at Robin Hood Ventures, we're focused on investment in the Delaware Valley for the most part. So as a result, as agnostic to industry, we are somewhat specific to geography, although we radiate out from the Delaware Valley. So if you look at this startup genome graph, you've got multiple axes that matter, but the key is, where is the growth, and is that growth sustainable? And I think we can all agree that areas like robotics and AI are continuing to grow very quickly. But the other area that you see up there, in addition to blockchain, is ag tech and new food. And I think one of the things that will come out of the pandemic is that ag tech, especially as applied to food chain durability, is going to be huge with the closures of meat packing and dairy processing plants. really causing problems that nobody saw. Ways to use technology to solve that is going to probably push that in one direction. Whereas the area that's been absolutely hammered negatively with the pandemic is ad tech, where you see ad spending and ad costs going way, way down as spending has gone down. So this becomes the sort of graph that if you're looking at where to put your money, you need to be thinking about where the trends are going to be positive going forward. The key for Philadelphia is we remain a meds and eds sort of town, and you see where life sciences is, and you see where ed tech is, and those are not where, you know, those aren't the upper right quadrant type of opportunities. The great thing, though, is by being led by some superior researchers in our institutions of higher learning, we are seeing a lot of growth around advanced manufacturing, supply chain, robotics, AI, and analytics. So, and ag tech. So with that in mind, Philadelphia is responding to where not only the money is going, but where the growth opportunities are. And that's really, really important, because ultimately any community can only support so many companies pre-revenue, so many companies pre-profitability, because those are a drain on dollars, and we need companies that are willing and able to grow quickly enough so that the money can be coming back into the system as opposed to just being plowed into the companies. So that's what I take away from this. And the nice part is, looking at this year over year over year, these are all going to be moving back and forth. But the nice part is you can see Philadelphia has risen to the challenge of putting our smartest people and best technology into some areas that are very, very fast growing. Ellen, next slide.
Glenn, we had one question on that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We see clean tech on there, and then one of our viewers asked, what about clean energy and the environment? Is clean tech, is that trend, or where do those trends fit in, clean energy and the environment?
What's very interesting is when you talk about clean tech and then you talk about energy generation, they, in some ways, they overlay completely if you're talking about management side clean tech, which is, hey, how do we get whatever's coming out of the power plant to not pollute the surrounding air, water, land? That's purely in the clean tech. But if you talk about clean energy, often that comes under the advanced manufacturing side of the world, which is an efficiency play, meaning you use less energy because what you're making requires less energy or requires less input materials. So that becomes advanced manufacturing. So with these, if you tie them together, clean tech gets pulled, if it's more oriented towards generation, gets pulled more towards manufacturing or wherever the energy is being used. And at the same time, advanced manufacturing can take advantage of some of clean tech. So, I mean, look, these aren't perfect renditions of what's going on, and often you have overlap between industries, and good entrepreneurs learn very quickly to figure out where the trends are and package their company accordingly. So yeah, we've seen some life sciences companies recently that are very, very, very focused on what I'd call analytics and big data, as opposed to being a traditional life sciences company. Again, to pull them in a growth area to encourage investment interest. The same goes with ag tech, and the same goes with advanced manufacturing. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great,
Next
thank
slide.
you.
One of the great things is every community has its expertise. Philadelphia, long tradition, higher ed, top-notch healthcare facilities. Those are where we ended up with a meds and eds flavor. That's awesome because it's an infrastructure that we can support those. right? Not only do we have the great research centers in Philadelphia and the surrounding area, we also have a lot of the pharmaceutical industry, a lot of med device. So as a result, we can support those industries at multiple levels. That's really important, and that's what you see in other areas. Look, financial services and fintech, New York City, absolutely, because that's where the users are, and that's where the companies that are going to understand where those opportunities are going to be located. Israel with military just makes perfect sense because of the integration of the military into the entire Israeli nation and the understanding of the military with the broad populace there. Cybersecurity also. Tel Aviv is a real center for that. These all make sense. Boulder, this becomes more of a lifestyle. Why is natural and organic food products? Because a lot of the organic food industry started in the Mountain States, and Boulder became a center for this, but it was also greatly supported by the university there. So again, playing off the university resources, playing off those entrenched industries that you have. The one that's interesting about Amsterdam in terms of food processing is the Dutch are a monster power in the ag space for all of Europe. And they've gotten really good at this, and you'd think small country and all of that. But keeping in mind that more of the Netherlands is under cultivation on a percentage basis than virtually any other country in the world. You know, think about the Central Valley of California overlaid on the Netherlands, and it's pretty much all of the Netherlands. So they've gotten really good about that. Also with the logistics that go into food processing and delivery. Next slide.
So I could do a whole hour presentation on this slide. I'm not going to do it, but it's important to understand that in order to have a strong startup community, you need all of the components, the leaders and the feeders. And it's really important that the leaders be the entrepreneurs, and that the other organizations feed the entrepreneurs to build up the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's two areas I want to highlight. One is universities. So universities provide a number of things. First of all, they provide the actual science and technology that Glenn was just talking about, but they also provide the labor and the students and in a non-COVID era, the space for people to meet. One of the successes in Colorado was the fact that the universities were the place that everybody went, that created density for community building. So the universities play a very large role in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The other group I want to highlight, which is more of an issue in Philadelphia, is the notion of the anchor firms or large companies. Large companies serve two purposes, serve a number of purposes. One is they can provide funding and expertise to the rest of the community, but they also create spin-offs. You know, in the large tech companies like Microsoft and Amazon, the number of companies that have spun off from there is staggering. And you know, someone will work for Microsoft, identify an issue, maybe start it as a pet project at Microsoft, get the okay to go spin it off somewhere, grow the company, sell the company. A lot of people actually come back to Microsoft in a cycle, and it's a very porous, P-O-R-O-U-S, kind of environment where people go back and forth from the large companies to the startups, and one startup begets another. That's an area that we don't see in Philadelphia as much. CHOP is beginning to do that somewhat. Comcast is not really known for a tremendous number of spin-offs or entrepreneurs leaving Comcast to go do something, and they're probably one of our biggest anchors. If there's anyone from FMC on the call, I'd be interested to know the statistics there. Before Capital One bought ING. They were a huge spin-off area. The other thing that large companies do that's of vital importance is they are often the first customer, first use for a lot of startups. And so that's a really important role that startups can play. And we're starting to see that happen in the ecosystem. And that's a critical role. And to provide expertise to the startups. So one thing you can provide startups is to be the first customer and help design it and be that pilot. And then, a company can say, well, Comcast is using us. And then, you get so much more credibility, right? So that's an important factor. But the other important factor is if you can take the collective, brain power at some of these large companies and have them mentoring the early stage companies, that provides a tremendous amount of value. Or even, what ING used to do, which I thought was fantastic, and I'm sure some of the large companies do this, is they would have a bi-weekly session where companies could come in and pitch to them, and they would give them feedback on what they needed to do to achieve product market fit. And that was tremendously valuable. So large companies provide a key role. Go ahead.
If you go back to that last slide, I want to just introduce one other thought, which is, please nobody think that you live in only a single bubble. Successful ecosystems are filled with people that bounce from bubble to bubble to bubble and occupy multiple bubbles in the ecosystem at all times, and also progress from one part of the ecosystem to another. One of the reasons why Silicon Valley has been so successful is that a disproportionate number of entrepreneurs who became successful entrepreneurs then became investors. And it is by that continuum that you keep money in an ecosystem and that you grow the ecosystem. So it is very important, yes, to create entities here in Philadelphia, but it is also important to have the right resources to grow those companies, to get to exits, for people to then be investors in the ecosystem. And by the way, this includes people coming from large companies. It includes service providers also becoming investors when it's possible. Obviously, the one place where that doesn't work is anybody coming from government because of conflict of interest issues. But everybody else, if you're a mentor, you can be an investor. If you're from a large company, you can be an investor. If you're an entrepreneur, hopefully you reach the point of being an investor. And the nice part is universities can be really, really critical investors, both in kind as well as in cash. And our institutions have figured that out here. And that's really heartening and separates Philadelphia from a lot of these other ecosystems.
Glenn and Carrie, just to time check, we have about 15 minutes to get through the rest of the slides. Okay, so there was a study done by that was commissioned by the Brookings Institute, and it's called Connect to Compete: How the University City, Center City Innovation District Can Help Philadelphia Excel Globally and Serve Locally. And before those of us who are in the North Philadelphia community get upset that North Philadelphia is not in there, it was paid for by people in University City and Center City. And as they started working, they then built in North Philadelphia, but it really is focused on the clusters in University City and Center City. So, and you can obtain this survey. So the innovation districts that Brookings looked at, they started looking at Northern Liberties, University Cities, Center City, and then they added in Temple, the Navy Yard, because there's a lot of technology going on there. And they also did some work looking at the suburbs. So they looked at the assets in the Philadelphia ecosystem, and they said that the Philadelphia metropolitan area has 2.8 million jobs, and it's got a critical mass of assets that very few places have. The region's eds and med sector is one of the strongest in the country. We have tremendous research expertise. And there's private sector strength in pharmaceuticals, and there is an influx of venture capital in the life science arena, which have made us a life science hub. And there's a lot of research capacity in engineering, automation technology, and computer science, which Glenn talked about earlier. So that does exist. And there's also growing clusters of digital health, financial services, advanced manufacturing, and media firms. The challenges in the Philadelphia ecosystem Industry presence is low and spatial. And so that's talking about the anchor firms and the large companies. And there's programmatic connection within and among institutions and the private, and the connections between those institutions and the private sector are weak. That has been a historical Philadelphia issue. There's a great ancient book by Digby Baltzell about Quaker Philadelphia and Puritan Boston. It's ancient, but it speaks to this. And that book was written in the 60s, I think. So this has been a very long issue, and this is something that hopefully people on the call can help us work on. And then the other issue they called out were inclusion challenges, and I don't have to tell anybody today the issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they really ring loud in Philadelphia. And so that's something that the ecosystem has been working to change, but we have a very long way to go. And that is probably a series of seminars all to themselves. Recommendations that they provided were to design and implement initiatives that were aimed at growing the city's advanced industry clusters, starting with precision medicine, which is a very focused piece of, part of life sciences that we see coming predominantly out of West Philadelphia. And then, and if there's someone from tech, commercialization on here, correct me on that, but that's my understanding. And then we really need to launch an anchor firm entrepreneurship initiative where we're working with the large companies in the region to connect more solidly with the startup community. So those were recommendations that they made. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to talk about KOZs and KIZs.
Yeah, one of the nice things that has transpired over the last decade is that the federal government, as well as the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, has figured out that they're not encouraging the resources that are available in many areas to be fully utilized. And so Pennsylvania was out in front of this with the creation of the Keystone Opportunity Zones. And then more recently, the federal government came up with the Qualified Opportunity Zones. These are different programs at the federal level. It encourages investment in areas, and this happens to be the Qualified Opportunity Zone map that you see up. You can ignore the KOZ at the bottom. But what it's done is, by census tracts, it is encouraging investment in these areas, and not only near-term investment, but investment with long hold periods in order for the investors to get tax-advantaged returns. And the rationale behind this was to stimulate lasting change. Again, as Ellen said, we could have a 3, 4, 5-hour seminar about whether this is or is not the right way to do it, but it is what the federal government put in place. So it is what should be part of the thought process if you are locating a new business or you are looking for investment, because investors are really, really good at maximizing their return. And if part of that is in tax avoidance, most investors are going to look for those opportunities. So you can see by census tracts, it's a little spotty. You can also see that obviously there are some areas that have a great density to them, and you have some other areas that are much less dense census tracts. So there should be a little bit for anybody. I think the QOZs are more oriented towards real estate development than they are towards small businesses, which is somewhat unfortunate, but that's just the way it worked out. If you go to the next slide. These are the Keystone Innovation Zone. These have direct tax benefits coming on an annualized basis for companies located in these areas. The odd part about this is the orange at the bottom is the Navy Yard. The orange across the middle is the Center City, University City. Well, it's actually Old City, Center City, University City stretch. And then the huge orange area on the top is what they call the 610, which goes from North Philadelphia all the way, as you can see, well out into Bucks County. So all told, these areas, if you're located and you meet the reporting criteria, your company will get benefits that are saleable. So you get a tax benefit from the Commonwealth that you can then sell in the secondary market. And it's one of the ways, again, that government is supporting early stage ventures. You can only get KIZ credits for a fixed period of time after starting the company. You have some limits in what industry and what you're doing, but it is another resource where Harrisburg is supporting startups across the Commonwealth, but that we have a lot of area in and around Philadelphia that can partake. Next slide.
Okay. So one of the things that Brad Feld talks about in terms of what makes a good startup community is to make it easy for people to find the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And for the longest time, that was really a hard thing to do. And I applaud the work done by Philly startup leaders to put together the Philly Tech Guide so that you can quickly identify, what some of the key startups are, where the incubators are, co-working space, who the investors are, etc. And so I encourage anyone who's trying to get involved in the startup community to start with the Philly Tech Guide. I also I have a few other recommendations for people to do if you're trying to get involved with Philly Tech. One is to read Technically Philly, which by the way was founded by four Temple alums, but read Technically Philly. It will give you a really good sense of what's going on in the region. I would tell you to join Philly Startup Leaders, and I would tell you to go to Venture Cafe on Thursday nights. It's virtual throughout the summer at the Science Center. They are all running programs that will help you understand where to go and will help you feel connected. And I think those are really, really key things. Just to share, there's a number of local funding groups, and got a couple little things on here that are out of date. Investor Circle is now called Social Ventures, but there are a number of funding groups. There's a number of individual angels. There's also some venture funds that do early stage investing as well. And Ben Franklin in Philadelphia, Ben Franklin has 5 regions across the state that are really important. They're the first impetus, usually the first money in. They are really key. They're really key to the funding ecosystem. Ben Franklin Southeast PA is the one in the Philadelphia region. And then New Jersey, there's New Jersey EDA. So those are important first funders and early resources to go to. Just a few other resources I want to mention. So Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures is run out of Temple, but it's for the whole region. We run quarterly forums. We have a screening and coaching process. Our goal is to help companies get ready for funding. So a lot of times companies think they're ready for funding. They go talk to investors, and they're not ready yet. So we try and help the companies get ready for funding, make sure that they've thought through the critical issues that investors will care about, and present themselves in the best way possible. If there's any Temple students who are on this, there's also an opportunity for Temple students to attend quarterly forums. It's actually an opportunity for other students as well. And as a matter of fact, we have a new sponsorship which pays for student companies to present and go through the screening process. During the summer, we normally run 4 forums a year. During the summer, in lieu of putting 100 people in a room, we're doing coaching all summer long. So you can sign up if you are a company that's ready for that you believe that you're ready for funding. You can go through a grueling process with a group of 5 or 6 investors who will hear your pitch, give you feedback, and give you some strategies on what's next. So I would encourage you to try that, and that's madv.org. I think some of my colleagues are here from the Small Business Development Center. This is a crucial organization as part of the overall ecosystem. The Small Business Development Center gets funding from the SBA. Their goal is to help businesses start, grow, and prosper. They provide free consulting services that are delivered by extremely experienced, knowledgeable people who have been part of the entrepreneurial scene for a long time. They provide legal services, consulting services, marketing services, financial strategy, really a phenomenal organization. And anyone who's, running a company, whether you're a startup or beyond, can get help from this organization. I cannot recommend their services enough. And then finally, you've probably heard about the IEI. We've been a center of Temple entrepreneurial activity for 20 plus years. We work across the university. We work with Temple students as well as alumni. Our programs are open to all Temple students, alumni, faculty, and staff. And in fact, many of our programs are open to people all across the Philadelphia region. We have a number of different initiatives, free workshops. We have student organizations. We have a really strong mentoring and advising program. We've got great courses, which Carrie's mentioned, and the graduate, master's, and certificate program. I'll keep the slide up here, and we are open for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ellen and Glenn. We do have a couple questions that came through the chat, so I'll start with them. Let's see here. Farouk is asking, is there someone at city or state government level who's responsible for the startup ecosystem around Philadelphia and Pennsylvania? So what does the government structure look like in the city and the state, more specifically, if you know?
I'm having a senior moment. There is a group that does that. They're out of the, I don't know, is anybody on the call from that group? It's out of DCED? Glenn, can you jump in? I can't think of the name.
Look, I want to actually answer this differently, because I want to start at the top and work our way down, because we mentioned Ben Franklin Technology Partners. At the state level, if you are in a tech space, they should be your first go-to if you are ready to look for funding, okay? Because they actually are investors. At the city level, it's more about resources and resource allocations that are not directly financial that are available to you. And there is a different challenge. So the question becomes, do you want advice or do you want money? If you're talking to investors, private investors, you ask for advice, you get money. You ask for money, you get advice. It's an old saying, and it's often very true. But when it comes to public resources, you need to know who you're going to in order to get what you need. So as a funding organization, it's Ben Franklin Technology Partners in the 5 counties of southeastern Pennsylvania. That means you're going to the Navy Yard, which is where their headquarters are. They break it up based along technology. They have a whole lot of really good people. And all of those people not only are funders, but they're also connectors. So that becomes the first step there. At the city level, the question is, what do you need, right? Do you need human capital, in which case you've got resources in terms of hiring and along those lines. If you need access to other resources, you may be going somewhere different. And again, that then changes if you're going outside of the city, because each of the counties does it somewhat differently as well. I know that's a roundabout answer, but the problem very simply is, without knowing the specific needs, it's very difficult to direct people. And that's one of the things that is somewhat confusing here. Then you add in the fact that New Jersey's just across the river and Delaware's just down the road. they play completely differently as well. Being able to know all of these things and having a unified voice in this is not going to happen because, welcome to America, we have federalism. Sorry. Carrie, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. What about for international students or international companies or immigrants who potentially are not citizens? What do these resources apply to them? Where should they? Are there specific resources for international people?
Yeah, there are a different set of resources that are available. If you are looking to move into the U.S. market and you're a foreign company, there are what are typically called soft landing sites. The Science Center runs one of these, where they give you the resources, but they also have a significant education component around that, where, look, you're going to have to learn about visas. You're going to have to learn about U.S. labor law. You're going to have to learn about a whole lot of things beyond just raising money the way a U.S. national-based company is. So having these soft landing sites are really, really important. The Science Center, I think, has one of the more active ones. There's also some resources within city government along those lines. The issue becomes the one of funding, just due to the fact that I don't know anybody that is funding companies specifically for, foreign founders, foreign structures. Ellen, do you know anybody that's focused just on that?
No, I know Blondine Chantapai has a program. If I murdered her name, apologize. I'm running out of the SBDC, but I don't know anything in specific.
Yeah, our friends Jamie and Carl from the SBDC said they have a international incubator soft landing program. So yes, there are programs available. We have one question about talent and human resources. Where's the best place to look for, talent and how to get employees and things like that?
Well, the question is, what do you need, right? You're going to look for your talent in different places depending on what level you need. If you need somebody that is capable to do coding for AI, you're going to probably be looking at recent university graduates. You're going to be looking at the universities to give you those resources, or you're going to look for some of the more established technology companies and figure out whether you can afford to poach people. That's the one thing that it's sort of odd to me. When you look at Philadelphia, there's a real resistance to hiring people away from your competitors in Philadelphia. But if you go to other places like Austin and Silicon Valley, it is what people expect to have happen. And so as a result, it just sort of changes the way people pursue things. But look, the best place to find the talent you need is the competitor you're trying to emulate. After that, you have to figure out where those people were trained and go there. So those are usually the two areas. Obviously, the larger labor pool, if you're a manufacturing company and you're looking to spin up manufacturing where you're going to have a lot of human resources, being able to staff those is a bit of a challenge, although, pre-pandemic with very low unemployment, it was a real challenge to do it. And we had some portfolio companies suffering. Now, I don't know what that's going to mean because we don't know what manufacturing is going to look like long term. So your challenges are specific to where you are in terms of industry and geography, obviously.
Great. Rob Williams, who teaches in our program, asks, pre-COVID, using common workplaces and incubators seemed to be essential for advice, talent, and funds to be, in the community literally. Now these spaces seem scary. What do you think about, co-working spaces, incubators, and the advantage they provided, and how are we going to make up for that, or what's going to be the future of those kind of initiatives?
I'll answer it with a very tongue-in-cheek response. All you have to do is look at what the financial markets have done to WeWork's valuation to understand the downside to the pandemic for co-working spaces and companies. But you know, that the popular press has taken care of for us. The issue, very simply, is going to be the most efficient place for people to do whatever they want to do. And co-working spaces were great because it made interactions very, very easy for a startup that did not have a whole lot of resources to be able to tap into common resources. That changed with the pandemic. There's no question about that. But the need for those resources still exists. The question becomes, who is going to get those resources in a fashion that people are comfortable utilizing them? Is it on Zoom calls? Is it 6 feet away? You know, we don't know yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty around that. But I believe a lot of people have gotten very comfortable with Zoom and other formats very, very quickly, in a way that this may be a harbinger of a fundamental change in how people interact, and that's going to influence where people do their jobs.
And, you know, I can speak for, I mean, some of the organizations have done a really good job of continuing to create community. If you look at the programming that the SBDC has put out in the last 3 months, I'm frankly blown away by the amount of programming that they've been able to provide to the community. You know, I feel that, you know, I just observing the work that has come out of Temple's, you know, accelerator and mentoring programs, the level of activity and engagement has actually increased in a world of Zoom, which I find fascinating. Venture Cafe continues to operate. Even Philly Tech Week, you know, is you know, it has been continuing remotely. So, I mean, at some point we're all going to, you know, we may all get zoomed out, and in other ways, as Glenn said, it may just become the way that we all learn to operate. I know I'm getting more calls from people directly for advice and guidance than ever before, because people are, you know, picking up the phone and reaching out, which I think is really interesting.
Great. Cliff asks, I often hear entrepreneurs characterize the Philly investor community as being very conservative. Is that a fair observation? Yes.
Next question. No, sorry, I have to give some more color to that. The difference is the experience of the investors in the community. As I made mention of, if you go to Silicon Valley, most of the investors there had successful exits and were probably venture funded up front. So that combination changes the risk perspective of those investors. Philadelphia, and to a great extent Boston, have a different history, and the question then becomes the risk-reward ratio, as well as the expertise that can be brought to bear from those investors. So Philadelphia traditionally has had investors whose money, tech investors, whose money was not necessarily created in technologies. It may have been created in manufacturing, it may have been created in media, it could have been created in life sciences, but it was not created in what we call tech. You know, the blue circles in the upper right side of the graph earlier. So as a result, that has led to a more conservative bent. What it does mean, though, is Philadelphia is a friendlier place to raise funds for opportunities that are already generating revenue and have proven product market fit, but maybe going after a smaller market. Whereas Silicon Valley, you can be pre-revenue, you can be on a napkin. If you're going after a huge market, that's what they want to see first. Philadelphia wants to see the product market fit, the proof of concept, and those sorts of things. So yes, is it more conservative in terms of what kinds of deals in what stage? Yes, but that doesn't mean that if you are at the right stage, you're not going to find a friendly investor community here. There's plenty of money in Philadelphia. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. Jess, one of our entrepreneurs from Temple, asks, when you were talking about large companies and the role they play, would you recommend for us to reach out as a startup to the large companies that fit our industry to look for resources? Or how would you, considering that large role that these companies play, how would you recommend interacting with them if you're a startup?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. First of all, if you're a current student, there's no better time than to call anybody in the community. If you start it with, I'm a Drexel student, or I'm a Temple student, or I'm a whatever student, if you start with that sentence, particularly if you can find an alumnus from, whatever the right word is, from your school, that call will get taken. So use that to your advantage, okay? In general, yes, if you don't ask, you're not going to get. We need to create, we need to this anchor initiative, I think, needs to happen to make it more transparent and more frequent how the large companies are interacting with the small companies. Right now, I mean, you're going to have to like figure it out yourself. There's not an easy, transparent path to that. And I think that's what some cities have created. Glenn, you look like you want to add something.
Yeah. One of the things to keep in mind is that most of these relationships that are created between large employers, small employers, startups, universities, and all, these are first-person relationships. And it goes beyond just, having a first after somebody's name on LinkedIn for you, right? It means really knowing what these people are doing and having some shared experience with them. So if it's you went to the same school, you studied with the same prof, you used to work for the same company, whatever it is, that opens the door. And then it's a question of being able to ask for resources that are readily available. And that's the whole thing about, should you reach out to a big company? What do you want from that big company? Do you want them to be a customer, right? Do you want them to run an incubator that you might fit into? Comcast, by the way, they brought Techstars in to run theirs. They're oriented that way to encourage interaction and to look at a community. Now, of course, they turned around and opened that program up more widely geographically, so the Philly startups are competing with other people. That's fine, because it may bring more startups to Philadelphia that will then stay in Philadelphia. So every company is going to have a different attitude about how to interact, but the number one way, if you want an interaction with a big company, is figure out how they want to buy whatever it is you're selling. And if you can do that, then they become a consumer, and that's the fundamental relationship of commerce, no matter what the sizes are.
And this is kind of a tangent to this, but one of the things I'm always surprised by is how willing the subject matter experts in universities are willing to talk to people in startups who need some help and guidance in something that they're working on, and how reticent people are to ask them. And it's not easy to find, who the expert is in your topic, but, I've seen it play out very, very positively. Where, when people were doing, there were startups around concussions, for example. Well, for Temple, for example, has some of the leading concussion experts in the world. And so, they made a connection, and the concussion experts were able to really help the startup. So that's something else you should be thinking about is where are the expertise in the different universities, and how do you access that?
Great. We had one question, what percentage of startups in Philadelphia are minority owned? I was trying to do some quick research. I found that the number of businesses that are minority owned in Philadelphia, it's about 15.7%. That's from the census data. I didn't find anything very quickly on startups, so I wanted to give you a chance if you know anything about those percentages or have any other comments on that.
I'm going to answer in general, kind of academically, and then let Glenn answer specifically for Philadelphia. I guess the bad news is across the country, and if you're saying minority entrepreneurs, you need to be specific. So I'm going to speak about, there's some study that Babson does on, and Kauffman Institute does on how different racial groups fare in the startup community. And first there's how many companies there are, and then how many companies only have one employee. So there may be a lot of Black-owned companies, 15%, but the number of Black-owned companies that have more than one employee is woefully small, not just in Philadelphia, but across the country. And the number of Black entrepreneurs who get funding is abysmal. The last number I saw was under 1%. It's also true for women. It's about women get about 3% of venture funding. People of color get 1% of funding. The numbers have changed a little bit, but as of a study in 2017, I think there were only 2 women of color. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. There were only 2 Black women who had gotten more than $1 million of funding from anybody in this country. Those numbers have changed, but it's still, it's not a good picture. It's not a good story. And there's a number of, people who are looking at how do we change that? I know Mid-Atlantic Diamond, I can speak for Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures. We work really hard and have been successful in our quarterly events, in having a very diverse panel of companies by race, by industry, by gender. I know, PACT is doing some work in this area, and I hate to be a cliche, but we need to do better. And groups are actually figuring out, you can't just say we got to do better. You have to come up with very, very specific things that you're going to do. And I can speak for myself. I'm in the midst of trying to do that right now. I know there are other people who are trying to do that right now. How do we open up the funding gates? It's not just, it's how do you open the pipelines? I'm not saying anything new, but I think the good thing that's happened in the last few weeks is that many people's eyes have been open, not just a few people. And so I think pushing out some real change is going to be easier. And I'm going to get off my soapbox. Glenn, you go.
Now, it's actually one of the ironies of the pandemic is all of a sudden you're evaluating a lot of companies in a colorblind fashion for the most part, because you're not meeting people. You're looking at paper, or you're looking at a screen in today's world. And it gives you the opportunity to evaluate the business without regard to any of the rest of race, gender, creed, or anything else. And so the question's going to be, long term, is this helpful or is it not? But what I'm hoping comes out of all of this is all of those good ideas are going to be evaluated based on the quality of the idea and based on the information that the creators of the company can give, and that informs where we go long term. Because there is absolutely no question we have a very, very rich entrepreneurial community, and it cuts across colors, it cuts across genders, and the question just is, how do we free up the capital to go to the best opportunities? As an investor, I want the greatest returns. which means I want the most successful entrepreneurs. And that has absolutely nothing to do with anything other than give me an idea, give me a market, and give me the fact that the entrepreneurs are well positioned to be successful. That's what we want. And I think every entrepreneur just wants a fair shot at that, and the resources to be equally spread to the ideas as opposed to anything else. So that's where I think the pandemic may be a little bit helpful. We'll wait and see. Again, you know, until you're 10 years out and looking back, you really don't know how these things have affected society.
I think there's another interesting piece in here, which is Kaufman Institute did some research which shows that accelerators level the playing field. And so, because if you get into an accelerator, it gives you some credibility by being in the accelerator, and the accelerator's role is to introduce you to the right people, the right mentors, the right funders, the right large companies, etc. And the accelerators have done a much better job than investors have in being diverse. So one of the recommendations from Kaufman is to get into an accelerator.
Great, thank you very much. We're just past 11 o'clock now. I don't see any other chats or questions. Does anyone have a question they want to raise their hand and ask that we didn't get to yet? We okay? All right, well, with that, we will adjourn. Ellen and Glenn, thank you very much. Very insightful. If you want more information about any of the IEI programs, again, we have an accelerator. We have some programs that are open to the larger community, some programs just for Temple students and faculty and alumni. We'll be happy to provide you more information, so don't hesitate to get in contact with me. Again, my name is Carrie Slade, and my email is carrie.slade@temple.edu. Thank you very much again. Everyone have a wonderful day and a great weekend.
Okay. Can you stop recording?
Sure, yes. Done.